There was an approved government policy to safely evacuate as many vulnerable Afghans as possible, which included obviously Canadians first.
The Sikhs in Afghanistan were not in direct danger. India had given them asylum.
It also included vulnerable Afghans, which included religious minorities like the Afghan Sikhs.
This is one of the biggest scandals of the Liberal government.
In all things I shall do as a faithful and true servant.
Many in our community have been sounding the alarm bell, but have been silenced. Some have been killed.
David Menzies for Rebel News here in Mississauga, Ontario. And you know, just before the Dominion Day long weekend, the Globe and Mail newspaper delivered a bombshell report, namely Liberal Defence Minister Harjit Sajjan personally directed Canadian Special Forces to rescue more than 200 Afghan Sikhs during the fall of Kabul in August 2021. Evidently, this diverted critical resources away from the evacuation of Canadian citizens, translators, and other Afghans who aided Canada's two-decade-long war in that country. To me, this is an outrageous scandal. I think it's also scandalous it's not getting the amount of media it deserves. And I decided to reach out to our good friend Smith. He is an Indian who needs his identity concealed because there are some nefarious characters that would do him harm for, well, basically calling it as he sees it. And I guess, you know, first of all, when you saw this story, that goes back to last Thursday, what did you make of it?
To be honest, I wasn't really surprised. We have a government that is encouraging every group of people to act ethnocentric and rewarding that sort of behavior. So why should we be shocked when he did that? The more surprising thing is the lack of a response from any opposition parties or outrage from the media or the lack of honor from this minister, because any other person would have resigned.
Oh, indeed. And I thought some of the outrage, it was outrage directed at the Globe saying that this was racist.
I'll be honest with you, I didn't think I would be getting those questions if I wasn't wearing a turban. And those who actually know me quite well, that throughout my careers and my service, I've rarely ever even talked about racism and what it actually meant. But I'll be honest with you, you know, it needs to be called out.
I mean, even perhaps the worst conservative, so-called, in Canadian history, that would be sneaky Patrick Brown, the mayor of Brampton, the very municipality next door. He was decrying that. I don't think this has anything to do with race. I think it's all about nationality. In other words, if you've got a Canadian passport, that's who you should be rescuing. But we can't, you know, ignore the elephant in the room. Minister Sajjan, that is Sikh. Those he went to rescue are Sikhs. Is it really putting members of his own faith group above Canadians?
I wouldn't say that the minister is that benevolent to put his fellow Sikhs above Canadians. There were quite a few donations that went to his campaign from groups that wanted this to happen. Speaking of Patrick Brown, the man, I cannot believe he is my mayor. He is completely compromised, and just yesterday came out in defense of Harjit. He said that it was the right thing to do. So when you have people like this running the country and us not doing anything about it, can you blame them for continuing to behave this way?
Sajjan has family ties to the controversial World Sikh Organization. What can you tell us about the World Sikh Organization?
I don't really care for these organizations, but I do care about the appeasement of them that is going on. That is where the issue is. Because it is a free country, you're free to associate with people, you're free to join these movements. But when we have them influencing our politicians and subverting democracy and causing racial and ethnic strife, that is a problem. When he was announced as the candidate in Vancouver, 4,000 to 5,000 Sikhs some people that I know very closely walked away from the Liberal Party because they said that this man was an extremist. An old school CBC reporter did very good stories on this topic, and now he's no longer with the CBC. I think he's retired. But he covered how this movement has bullied themselves to become the face of a religion when the majority of these people don't want to be represented by them. It's like the mafia representing Italians. I remember Brampton from the 90s when we had a Kmart here. Everybody was Canadian. Sure, there might have been a couple of issues, but for the most part it was nice. But now every group is weaponizing their victimhood. When victimhood becomes a currency, people are going to counterfeit. This country used to promote merit and hard work, but now victimhood is promoted. So you're going to see everybody trying to cash in, and I don't blame them. It is us who's supposed to stop cashing these checks.
Know quite well that there was an approved government policy to safely evacuate as many vulnerable Afghans as possible, which included obviously Canadians first, those who worked with us like our interpreters, and it also included vulnerable Afghans, which included religious minorities like the Afghan Sikhs and Hindus.
I just think, Ted, this is one of the biggest scandals of the Liberal government. I say that because lives, Canadian lives, were literally being put at risk. Not just Canadian lives, but the lives of our allies. What was the political capital to be had from such a movement? Was it simply Minister Sajjan appealing to the Sikh community at large as opposed to any other group in Canada?
There were campaign donations made to his campaign by the Afghan Sikh Coalition or organization in Vancouver. You have to keep in mind that these Sikhs in Afghanistan were not in direct danger. India had given them asylum, but they were country shopping, trying to get into a better country, and that's why it played out the way it did. His resignation depends on how we react. If we are more outraged by fake Jussie Smollett cultural sort of issues, but we look the other way when actual treason occurs, we deserve what we get.
I'm losing track of the number of Justin Trudeau scandals in these last 9 years. And speaking of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, wasn't it Trudeau who said a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian?
A Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian, and you devalue the citizenship of every Canadian.
Well, apparently in a rescue mission in Afghanistan almost 3 years ago, that was definitely not the case. For Rebel News, I'm David the Menzoid Menzies. Folks, where do we begin when it comes to checking off all the Justin Trudeau Liberal disasters? And one of the more recent ones is certainly the immigration file. Immigration is out of control in this country. Let's send a message to the Trudeau Liberals. Please go to our newest petition, netzeroimmigration.com. That's netzeroimmigration.com. Tell the government to get its house in order. And by the way, while you're there, folks, if you're able to, kindly make a donation so that Rebel News can continue to bring you the other side of the story.